Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. These words spoken by Jesus still echo through time. They challenge us, they inspire us, they change us. But what do they really mean? How can we love those who hurt us? It seems impossible. Yet Jesus calls us to this higher way of living. When someone wrongs you, what's your first instinct? To get even? To hold a grudge? That's normal. But Jesus asks us to do something different. He asks us to love not just our friends and family, but our enemies too. This teaching turns our world upside down. It goes against everything we've been taught about justice and fairness. Jesus didn't come to reinforce our old ways of thinking. He came to show us a new way, a way of love that knows no bounds. And in doing so, we set ourselves free. In Jesus' time, the idea of an eye for an eye was common. It was seen as justice. If someone hurt you, you had the right to hurt them back. This way of thinking is still alive today. We see it in our legal systems. We see it in our personal relationships. But Jesus challenged this old way of thinking. He said, "You have heard that it was said, 'Love your neighbor and hate your enemy.' But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." This was shocking. It still is. Love your enemies, pray for those who hurt you. It seems impossible. Yet this is exactly what Jesus taught. He didn't just talk about it, he lived it. Even as he hung on the cross, suffering and dying, he prayed for those who put him there. "Father, forgive them," he said. This is radical love in action. It's a love that goes beyond human understanding. To truly grasp the revolutionary nature of Jesus' teachings, we need to understand the world he lived in. First-century Palestine was a place of tension and conflict. The Jewish people were living under Roman rule. They faced oppression and injustice daily. Many were waiting for a warrior Messiah to overthrow their enemies. In this context, the idea of loving one's enemies was unthinkable. The common teaching was to love your neighbor, but your neighbor meant your fellow Jew. Enemies, especially the Roman oppressors, were to be hated and resisted. This wasn't just a cultural norm, it was seen as a religious duty. But Jesus came with a different message. He taught that God's love extends to all people, even those we consider enemies. He challenged his followers to see beyond national and religious boundaries. He called them to a higher standard of love. Let me tell you a story. It's about a man named John. John lived in a small town. He had a neighbor, Bill, who made his life miserable. Bill was loud. He let his dog bark all night. He never mowed his lawn. Worse, he spread rumors about John. The two men couldn't stand each other. One day, John came home to find Bill's house on fire. Without thinking, John ran into the burning building. He found Bill unconscious and carried him out. John saved Bill's life that day. When asked why he did it, John said, "Because that's what Jesus would do." This act of love changed everything. Bill was deeply moved by John's actions. He apologized for his behavior. The two men, once enemies, became friends. When we choose to love our enemies, something amazing happens. We change. Our hearts soften. Our perspective widens. We start to see the humanity in those we once despised. This doesn't mean we approve of wrong actions. It means we choose not to be defined by hatred or bitterness. Forgiveness is a key part of this love. It's not about forgetting what happened. It's about releasing the grip that anger and resentment have on us. When we forgive, we free ourselves. We step out of the victim role. We reclaim our power. We open ourselves to healing and growth. This transformation isn't just personal. It ripples out into society. When we choose love over hate, we break cycles of violence. We create space for dialogue and understanding. Today, we live in a world that often feels more divided than ever. Political tensions run high. Social media amplifies our differences. It's easy to see those who disagree with us as enemies. But Jesus' radical teaching calls us to a different way. It challenges us to see the image of God in every person, even those we strongly disagree with. What would our world look like if we took this teaching seriously? Imagine political opponents treating each other with respect and kindness. Picture neighbors of different faiths coming together to serve their community. Envision nations seeking understanding instead of retaliation. It seems impossible, but with God, all things are possible. This doesn't mean we ignore injustice or stop standing up for what's right. Jesus' love is not weak or passive, it's strong, it's active. It seeks the good of all people, including those who oppose us. The path of loving our enemies isn't easy, but it's the path that leads to true peace and lasting change.